second part of our reflection, that is exercising authority and obedience in consecrated life. So we will see it under the following aspects. First of all, obedience, oppressive or liberating. Secondly, exercise of authority, autocratic or democratic. Thirdly, freedom, a huge risk and a responsibility. Then power, potential for abuse and opportunity for service. Then power and authority, the path of Jesus. And finally, we will conclude a story for prayer and reflection. So we start by the second, the second theme, our second part of our theme, by taking our first theme, that is obedience, whether it is oppressive or liberating. On the one hand, the iGen, that is the generation that was born up in 1995, who had the communication, information, and the entertainment in their fingertips, with their iPods and iPhones, stubbornly remain adolescent rather than growing into adulthood in their thinking, feeling, judging, values, attitudes, and mindset. Today, in the postmodern culture, on the one hand, we will see the present generation that is born up in 1995. Technically, we call iGen. So the generation that is born after the discovery of this iPod and iPhone, so they have in their fingertip, so communication, all the communication, information, entertainment in their fingertip. But unfortunately, they stubbornly remain as adolescents, and so in other words, they stagnate themselves as far as growth is concerned, and they stubbornly refuse to become adults in their thinking, feeling, judging, values, attitudes, and mindset. On the other hand, postmodern culture has succeeded in indoctrinating people that by the age of 18, an individual should be left free to pursue unhindered what he or she wants to do with his life. I suppose you understood. On the one hand, the generation that is born after 1995, the so-called iGen, they refuse to grow into what is as far as values are concerned, or maybe thinking is concerned, or feeling is concerned, attitudes are concerned, or the mindset is concerned. They stubbornly remain as adolescents. On the other hand, our post-modern culture has succeeded in indoctrinating people that once somebody has reached the age 18, whether they have grown to adulthood as far as thinking, feeling, judging as concerned, that is not taken into account. Once somebody has reached the age of 18, that individual should be left free to pursue unhindered what he or she wants to do in his life. So this is the reality. So, okay. So according to which neither God nor humans have the right to step into the sacred ground of one's personal freedom. This is what is indoctrinated by the postmodern culture. This exaggerated view on individual freedom creates a self-destructive, narcissistic mindset whereby the individual indulges in unrestricted abuse of the gift of personal freedom without any objective moral or religious compass to guide his choices. Suppose if we see a person who has reached 19 or something, suppose we see them taking drugs. Suppose we think about advising them, the immediate response will come telling that, what is it for you? This is my life. I am a mature person, I am an adult person. Well, often consecrated life also tends to get caught up in the ambiguity of postmodern culture about individual freedom, self-realization, and self-determination. So we are part of, in other words, the present generation is agent, and we have seen what is their mindset. And now, consequent people are also tempted to pick up that mindset. So it is this culture which gives unlimited freedom without any objective moral values. It is in this mindset. So this mindset, even the present generation of the consequent people also embrace. The virtue of obedience is also called into question under the dictatorship of relativism that does not recognize anything as a definitive and whose ultimate goal consists solely in one's ego, following one's ego and desires. No objective values. The secular humanism, with its cult of reason and scientific appeal, has tried to divest evangelical counsels of their transcendental value and present them as irrelevant for the autonomous adult person. So in other words, they understand or they take obedience is something not in accordance with the present concept of human life. So autonomy and dignity of persons. So that is certainly fundamental to exercise the authority and obedience in consequent life. So certainly we are not rejecting this concept of autonomy and dignity of persons. So what we tell is that we have to grow into the reality. So evangelical obedience has the characteristic of carrying out a mystery mandate in freedom, love, and joy, no matter how difficult or unpleasant it might be. So in other words, as consecrated people, when we leave the our obedience, what we do is, as a congregation, we are given a missionary mandate, and that is what we are going to fulfill. Even if it is difficult, even if it is hard, I may have to go through maybe suffering, painful moments. Whatever is the reality, by taking the vow of obedience, what we do is to fulfill the missionary mandate the congregation has received. So any activity carried out unwillingly in fear and in bitterness is not obedience. As I told, the present generation of the consecrated people also, they pick up also the values of the present world, the values of the agent, and that way, when they accept, maybe when they have to obey, so probably the primary quality for an evangelical counsel, that is to embrace it with freedom, is lacking in their lives. The challenge of consecrated obedience is to educate the mind and heart to seek and do God's will manifest in manifold ways, especially through the mediation of authority. So that is the challenge of obedience as far as consecrated people are concerned. Well, we move on to our next theme, that is exercise of authority, autocratic or democratic. In our politically polarized world, many tend to view exercise of authority in the church in terms of political ideologies. So exercise of authority in religious life is neither autocratic nor democratic, though there are features of both kinds of governance in all church institutions. So as far as authority and obedience is concerned, or exercise of authority and obedience is concerned in the church, it doesn't follow purely autocratic principles or purely democratic principles, but we also find the maybe elements of both these forms of governance in the church institutions. It could be better to describe as pneumocratic. It is guided by the Spirit. The guiding values of our life as consecrated people are not democratically chosen, but derived from the life of Christ. So the question, suppose we ask the question, what is the type of governance in church institutions? So it is neither democratic nor autocratic. So the best term we can use will be pneumocratic. So the guy, in other words, it is a spirit that reveals what has to be done. Okay. So, however, many practical aspects of life and mission are discerned and decided jointly in communities, councils, and chapters. In other words, as we already told, in all the church institutions, we come across both characteristics of both the type of governance, autocratic as well as democratic. So, as well, both the church as well as religious life, many of the practical aspects of doing things are concerned is decided jointly in communities or in councils or in chapters. The discretion of superiors as well as the initiative members have their proper place in deciding and realizing the evangelical project of life is concerned. So we have already told, as far as obedience is concerned, it is to fulfill a missionary mandate that is given to the congregation. In that, the discretion of the provincial, the superiors, as well as the contribution of the individual members, so is taken into account. So the best way we can understand to the obedience in consecrated life is to compare it with the dynamics of an orchestra. Living a consecrated life is like an orchestra which performs neither in an autocratic nor in a democratic manner. A beautiful symphony of music is harmoniously orchestrated by the director and the players together. Each one should know their unique role and play their instrument in harmony with one another and in accordance with the director's guidance. This is possible only if the hearts are tuned to unified vision of the music which they are trying to transmit out to the public. The director's lead unifies the musicians and brings the best out of the group. Anyone playing on one song without caring about the director or about other players create a cacophony, a disharmony. Obedience and disobedience in consecrated life are better understood by watching the dynamics of this orchestra. The harmonious exercise of authority and obedience in our institutes should avoid the exaggeration of collectivism and individualism. Tap the gifts of the individuals or tap the gifts and initiatives of the individuals as well as the collective wisdom and joint efforts of all members. The principles of subsidiarity, subordination, collaboration, and fraternal correction achieve this fruitful balance. Suppose the community has to give a beautiful music. Well, it has to follow the principles of subsidiarity. So certain superiors the major superiors has to follow the principles of subsidiarity, and say as far as subjects are concerned, maybe subordination and also collaboration and fraternal correction to achieve this fruitful balance. So an autocratic superior, so in other words, a cacophony is created in religious life when an autocratic superior overdoes the principle of subordination. So suppose the major superiors, without recognizing, in other words, well, an autocratic superior overdoes the principle of subordination. So certainly, so in the subordination is emphasized in such a way that so this aspect of subsidiarity is neglected. An individualistic member exaggerates subsidiarity, and members working alone overthrow the principles of collaboration. resorting to backbiting and gossiping spoiled the fraternal correction. The result of is then a cacophonic display of fraternal love in the community. So as a community, we have a mission, and it is by working together, just like an orchestra under the director, we are able to achieve that task. Well, we move on to the next theme, that is freedom, a huge risk and responsibility. God took a huge risk by creating humans in his image and likeness, and by giving them the power and freedom for self-determination and responsibility to shape their future as individuals and as a people. Well, God created man in his own image, and he gave them freedom of choice. And we understand the other side of human freedom is capacity for abuse of power, irresponsibility, destruction, rebellion against the very creator. So what we told is, certainly God has created man in his image with the power of this choice. And it was a huge risk, because the other side of freedom is the capacity to abuse the power. So once we have the freedom, certainly along with that, even we have received the capacity to abuse the power and irresponsibility and destruction. So God has entrusted the universe to into the care of humanity. Certainly, so as a representative of God, man has to take care of the nature. On the other hand, if it destroys, abuses the freedom and destroys the nature, well, so that is part of the freedom that man receives. So this is the other side of the freedom, and rebellion against the very creator. That is what we have seen in the early chapters, the book of Genesis, and that is what we do each time when we sin. So when man left unrestrained, he is capable of unimaginable horrors and evildoing. We are the only species that plot massive murders of fellow humans outside of the need of survival. For example, suppose we look at the animals. So they may kill another animal for eating, or maybe for their food or for their survival. But on the other hand, man is the only being on the earth that can go for massive killing. So we have seen this reality in the two world wars that has taken place in the last century. So millions and millions of people were killed in the two world wars. And the local version of this wars we find in the civil wars. Quite often we come across civil wars taking place in different places, and thousands of people die, and the properties are destroyed, the nature is destroyed through the civil wars. Well, so we fight the same pattern most is also in consequence. In other words, we have seen, so the most is in the world outside, for example, so in the war, the human beings' capacity to hurt others. The same way, greed, envy, and anger can wake up the monsters for the consequent people also. So some day back, we remember, so in one of the pontifical institutes of India in Bangalore, so we have come across the murder of his rector, not because he has done anything bad, solely because of some power conflict. So this man was murdered exactly on the Easter Sunday night. And the priests were involved, and the priests who celebrated Easter vigil the previous night and gave wonderful homilies, the next day they were involved in the murder. And it would be naive to believe that, it would be premature to believe that profession, our religious profession, ordination will remove our power to hurt and devastate the lives of others? Are we in touch with our capacity for vicious desires to hurt others, which a disobeying freedom can enact? So when we look at our life, are we aware, are we conscious that when we disobey, we are also able to hurt others with our disobedience? Well, we move on to our next theme: power, potential for abuse, and opportunity for service. Nature has endowed us humans, like all other mammals, with the inbuilt neurological tendency to structure the group hierarchically with the ranks and status occupied by combatant members. In other words, all mammals, suppose we look at even animals, so we come across that. So the group is organized in a hierarchy structure. So someday, by just last 2 months, maybe 1 or 2 months back, we were talking about, we're hearing in the news about a group of elephants who took a long journey under the leadership of 4 elephants. 3 female, and I think it's 5, 4 female and 1 male elephant. So those 5 elephants took the lead for this long journey of the elephants, which is something extraordinary, which lasted for days and months, and it took thousands of kilometers. And members are social now. The members are socialized in such a group to restrain their impulses and delay gratification, to conform to the norms of the group and to obey the leader. So in other words, our socialization will help us to maybe to restrain our impulses. In other words, so people normally say maturity is our capacity for postponed gratifications. For example, animal world, they're just moving on impulses. On the other hand, we human beings have the capacity to restrain our impulses, and we can postpone gratification. So our socialization has helped us to to restrain our impulses, and also to follow a leader and maybe the norms of the community. And that way, so in every human society, and even among the animal world also, we find that there is a crucial role for the leaders. The leader's role is crucial to unify the group, to keep order and defend it from enemies. It requires competence to assume a leadership role. So in other words, not only among human beings, even among the animals, we find a leader taking the responsibility to lead, to protect the particular group. And human capacity for evil renders the position of power and authority a high risk area for corruption and abuse. So we have seen, so naturally, human beings are given with this inborn capacity to organize groups in a hierarchical way, according to the maybe hierarchical way, placing the adequate persons for leadership. But so this human capacity, just in the previous theme we have seen, so human beings are given the freedom, and human freedom on the one hand is a responsibility, and on the other, so the other hand, if it is abused, certainly it can create disasters. So that way, human capacity for evil renders the position of power and authority high risk area for corruption and abuse. History is full of many monstrous tyrants and despots whose intrigues, lechery, sexual orgies, and easy elimination of potential rivals were notorious. Suppose we look at the history of humanity, we come across similar tyrants all through the history. Well, the exploitative and ego-centered human relations favor slavery, nepotism, privileges, honors, and the cult of the leader. So the exploitative as well as ego-centered human relations favored these realities like slavery, nepotism, privileges, honors, and the cult of the leader. God's choice of people of God has to be understood we have seen. So when God chose Israel as his chosen people, he wanted Israel not only he wanted Israel to not he wanted to give Israel not only a political freedom, and in fact he wanted Israel as a contrast community. So the choice of Israel has been understood in the context of the basic capacity of man, basic nature of man for hurting each other. So it is such a context. So God wanted the liberative power of God to reach all aspects of human life. So in other words, when God chose Israel, he wanted not only a freedom politically, in fact, every aspect of human life, social, psychological, emotional, every aspect of life has to be permeated by the freedom of God. So that is what God wanted. That is why God gave them the law, commandments. Okay. So we come across different degrees of abuse of power and authority in all human groups, families, communities, organizations, institutions, political parties, in all the places we come across different types of abuse of power. It brings lot of suffering for the people. We need to situate obedience in the context of our inbuilt nature of love and hate, service and abuse, domination and submission, construction and destruction, collaboration and conflict in any group situation. So we have, as human beings, we have all these innate natures. So we have the capacity to love and hate. So service and abuse, domination and submission, and construction and destruction, and collaboration and to cooperate. The scandals of the church remind us how even in among the consecrated people, consecrated people fall into temptation to abuse power in their ministry. So grace is needed to upgrade human nature to operate from the light from above and transform hatred into love, domination into service, selfishness into self-donation. Obedience to the will of God leads us to this terrain. Well, we move on to our next theme, that is power and authority, the path of Jesus. Well, in the second part, we have seen, the authority obedience part in the church, whether it is democratic or autocratic. Then we have also seen human beings' power to hurt others. Then we have also seen, so there is this, among all the groups, so among the all maybe among the all groups of human beings, so there is a natural innate tendency to organize group hierarchically. And we have also seen, because of the human capacity to evil or tendency to do evil, certainly these authorities has got the capacity, so they can make use of their authority for service as well as for destruction. So now we look towards the person of Jesus, how Jesus has exercised authority and obedience, or what Jesus told to his disciples, followers, as far as this aspect of exercising authority and obedience is concerned. So we turn to Jesus to learn how to exercise power and authority, and at the same time learn obedience to suffering as he did. So we started by telling, or in other words, the very title for the theme which we are discussing is learning obedience to suffering. So Jesus sets before us a completely new dynamics of authority and obedience, which we should learn by following him closely. So we have to follow the teachings of Jesus very closely. It gives us a completely new understanding regarding exercise of authority and obedience is concerned. So we have seen in the passion traditions of Jesus, in fact, the second as well as third passion traditions, the disciples were tempted with worldly motives of embracing power and positions. In that context, Jesus confronted his disciples when they were arguing among themselves about the distribution of power and position in the kingdom in which Jesus is going to establish. Well, Jesus invited them to a new way of thinking, which we can summarize in 3 steps. In Matthew 20, 25, 28, we have parallel in all the 3 synoptic gospels. So in that passage, in the context of 2 of the disciples, that is Zebedee brothers, asking for 2 important positions, and after that the conflict, in response to that, even Jesus will call out his disciples to him and tell them how authority and obedience has to be exercised or understood among the disciples of Jesus. So we can see it under 3 steps. First of all, rejection of worldly way of exercising authority. He will speak in terms, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. The second step, exhorting a new approach. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Thirdly, the model of Jesus' life. As the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. In the practice of authority and obedience in consecrated life, this teaching of Christ offers the key to understand. So because of that reason, we will analyze these 3-4 steps as far as Jesus' understanding of authority and obedience is concerned. The first step, rejection of the worldly way of using power and authority. This is the first thing Jesus told his disciples as far as this theme is concerned. So the exercise of authority and obedience among the disciples should be something different from the way it is exercised by others. In fact, Carl Jung says, no tree can grow to heaven unless the roots reach to hell. The strings of abuse of power and disobedience are pulled by the dark desires dwelling in the unknown depths of human heart. If you want to depower them, you need to go there. That means we have to go deep down in our hearts where these desires are there with the lamp of word of God and bring them to life of the Lord. So only that way, so it comes this power to dominate, power to hurt, or this maybe to power to maybe this desire to abuse power. This comes from our desires that are deep down in our heart. So suppose depower those desires, cravings. Well, we have reached there, the depth of our heart with the light of the word of God. So Jesus, before his public ministry, made a retreat in the desert. Before starting his public ministry, Jesus retreated to the desert to confront the devil, who is also with the scripture knowledge. So in the desert, when devil tempts Jesus, well, we know devil will tempt him with the quoting from the Bible. Jesus teaches us how to deal with the tempter with his base in the desert. Well, The devil tried on Jesus his customary three base. So the three temptations. It has the history of total success on persons who are alienated from themselves and from the purpose of their lives. So suppose we don't understand, we alienate ourselves from our very identity, and if we don't understand what is the mission of our life, well, this threefold base of devil will be successful in our lives, and it has worked successfully in the case of many of us. Well, but we find Jesus refused to face as far as these three temptations are concerned. The first one, so the temptation was to turn stone into bread because Jesus was hungry and he was fasting 40 days in the desert. But he refused to feast at a banquet with one sold out to the devil, but at the table of the world. So just imagine, for argument's sake, think of Jesus collaborating with the tempter and making a banquet out of the rocks to alleviate all the privations and hunger he experienced in the anonymity of the desert. Just imagine, just think that. So Jesus agreed for that. Then what would have been his state? So devil's idea was an invitation to banquet, selling one's own soul. So how miserable it is to feast at a banquet with one soul sold out to devil as Judas did. How wonderful it is to feast on the word of God and break the bread to feed the multitudes. In fact, Jesus chose to become the bread to break it for others. So in other words, so when we have a Eucharistic understanding of our personal life, so we are people called to break our voices to the world. Secondly, he refused to make a show of his power. So the second temptation is certainly, we are aware about this. Jesus was taken to the pinnacle of the temple and he was asked to jump down from there. Imagine Jesus climbing up to the top of the temple and jumping down foolishly to push his father into action and making a show of himself to boost his ego as the crowd cheers on. Suppose Jesus does that one. In fact, from the part of the devil, it was an invitation to jump down to reduce to an entertainer, forgetting one's mission. How cheap a show it would be to reduce himself to be an entertainer, forgetting his mission for mankind. How life-saving was it to fall under the weight of the cross on his way to Calvary, while the people mocked and the soldiers lashed at him. Precisely by that one, he saved the mankind. Suppose he was choosing the praise, or maybe the glorification of the people, he would have failed in his mission. His mission was to redeem us, not to make a shameless exhibition of the personal glory. Regrettably, even to this day, there is no lack of shows of power and ego expansion in the world, especially people who hold responsibilities or authority. Thirdly, Jesus refused to betray God for wealth and power. Can you think of Jesus accepting the deal to prostrate before the devil in exchange of the power to dominate all nations? So this was the temptation. So devil told him, well, this whole universe is in my control. Suppose you prostrate and worship me, everything will be given to you. What a clever pretension to practice. What a clever pretension it is for the devil to promise the power and authority to the creator over his own creation. So Jesus has no need to make any alliance with the devil to become the sovereign. All the kingdom, power, and glory belong to God and not to human or to the devil. Hence, whom should we serve? God or the wealth or devil? Whom to obey? God or human beings? Well, just look to our own lives. Think of the number of secret pacts we may have made with the devil in the secrecy of our interior desert, where we uh, complied with his ploys. We have bitten those bays. Jesus' kind of response is to face the tempter squarely and assert our freedom and identity as God's child in utter obedience to God's saving design for us. So we have told Jesus understood his identity, occasion, mission precisely by obedience. Once we make a pact with the devil for our own advantage, well, we don't understand who we are, what is our occasion, and what is our mission. Well, gospel was second. So that was the first step we have spoken about. We have spoken about the 3 steps. And the second step was, so Jesus telling his disciples, so as far as authority and obedience is concerned, so we have told the first step, how authority and obedience exercise in the world outside. They dominate over the others. So the second step, Jesus will say, not so with you. Instead, who wants to become great among you must be your servant. So, in other words, instilling the kingdom values. Jesus' life and words conflict with the worship of the idols of power and act as antidote to clericalism and spiritual worldliness. The gospel views power and authority as service and donation of self. Service and authority, obedience to our superiors, and collaboration with others build on gospel love, which enable us to look beyond the human limitations to God and our merciful Father. So that is what we do in our obedience. Well, Satan defeated to the scale of our heavenly vision and the mindset. So once we are fed with the word of God, so we will have a mindset of heaven. We will have heavenly vision and heavenly mindset, and Satan will be defeated to the scale of our heavenly vision and mindset. The tempter operates on earthly vision, so which is temporary, which is on temporary gains and outward show, and strikes you when you are undernourished spiritually. So, as I told, suppose we have to defeat this the ploy of the devil. Well, it is possible only if we have a heavenly mindset and heavenly vision. And the tempter will always operate on the earthly vision. So with the temporary gaze, suppose temporary gaze and outward show, and they will strike us. So devil will strike us when we are undernourished spiritually. Satan is defeated only on the scale of heavenly vision, long-term goals, and authenticity of the heart surrendered to the Spirit of God. So in other words, we have told, so the devil's vision will be always, he operates always on the temporary gains scale. So it is only on earthly vision. So suppose we are to succeed, we should have a heavenly vision that is fed with the better course, feeding with better course. Okay. So in fact, authority and obedience are 2 dimensions of the same evangelical reality of the same Christian mystery, 2 complementary ways of participating in the same sacrifice of Christ. So both authority and obedience, so they are in fact participating the sacrifice of Christ. So in fact, by exercising authority and obedience, we understand what is our identity, what is our occasion, and what is our mission. Well, we move on to the 3rd step, that is Jesus' way of exercising authority and living obedience. So Christian faith attests that obedience to loving God who walks with us in our individual and collective journey brings the best out of us in true freedom. contrary to what is feared by the secular humanists and postmodern atheists. So we have spoken about so how the secular world doctrine about freedom. So they fear that suppose we obey, it will abandon our freedom. On the other hand, it will by obeying God we enjoy the real freedom. Okay, so Jesus' life shows us how to exercise authority at the service of people and how to lead our life in total dedication to our mission. So Jesus acted with authority to teach and heal people, drive out demons, confront the hypocrisy of religious leaders. In relation to disciples, Jesus washed their feet to show that authority is for service and gave them the command to love one another as he has loved them. Well, obedience calls for total availability to the Holy Spirit and an unconditional submission to the will of God. Such a total openness to God's will in one's life implies freedom rooted in love and service, and that will lead to real obedience. The formation for obedience is an education for genuine freedom that transcends the self-interest and pride. It necessarily involves learning obedience to suffering after the model of Christ. Well, finally, we conclude our theme with a story. So we understand consecrated life in the context of obedience as a total self-gift to Christ. Every reality in the consecrated life, including exercise of authority and obedience, should be expression of this total self-gift. Well, once there was a very poor man, and lifelong he prayed to God to make him rich. And one day, an angel appeared to him and told, tomorrow early morning you get up and go to such and such a place. There you will find a sannyasi sleeping. You wake him up and ask for the largest precious stone, and he will give you, and you will become the richest man in the world. Well, the next morning, the poor man got up, went to the place, and he found exactly as the angel has told him, and he woke him up, woke up the sannyasi, and asked him for the large precious stone. So he got up and he asked, so what do you want? So then he narrated what has happened the previous night. The angel has told him to ask for the largest precious stone. Well, then the sannyasi thought, well, the previous night when he has come here to sleep, he took a stone and put under his head. And if that is the only thing under his custody, if God has told this must be the thing, you take this stone and this must be the largest precious stone. Well, it was right. And now the poor man was very happy. He went back to his house. Now the house is so poor, and where to keep this precious stone? So what he did, he thought about keeping it under his pillow before sleeping. And that night, when he was about to sleep, he was so conscious, so aware of the precious stone that was under his pillow. The whole night he could not sleep. Towards morning, something clicked in his head. What he did, he took that precious stone, went by to the same place where he found the sannyasi in the previous night. He found the sannyasi sleeping in the same place. He woke him up, gave back the precious stone to him, and told, teach me what you do. Teach me to give away. Teach me what you do. Teach me to give away. Well, when we interpret this particular story in the light of the obedience, and that is understood in terms of total self-gift, let the light that is shine in the heart of this poor man inspire also to us to pray to Jesus like him. Uh, Teach me what you do. Teach me to give away. As far as Jesus is concerned, his life was total self-gift. When we understand the exercise of authority and obedience is concerned, certainly we have to understand in terms of Jesus' pattern of total self-gift. So just like sannyasi, so the moment he was asked about the precious stone, he simply gave away. He had no attachment to that stone because of that reason, he simply gave away. And that is the next night when he couldn't sleep at all. This is what inspired this man. The attitude of this man, attitude of the sannyasi, to give away without reservation. In fact, this is a sum total of consecrated life. Consecrated life is a total self-gift. And when we exercise both authority as well as obedience, we should be guided by this attitude of Jesus, giving away. So let us also ask for the light of God in our hearts so that, like this poor beggar, let us also pray, teach me what you do, teach me to give away.